preliminary investigation report into the Air India 17 crash is out. Oddly, it was released in the dead of night, but now there have been a few hours and we've all had an opportunity to look at it. The big question is this: will Boeing, a behemoth notorious for its spotty record, get away while the dead pilots, Captain Sumit Sabharwal and Captain Clive, are smeared by insinuation? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. In a moment from now, we'll be taking you through what the preliminary report says, why its open ended language may leave room for absolutely scurrilous interpretation that will seek to point a finger at the dead pilots, and the biggest question of all: what about the role of Boeing? Here's the big headline. The Air India preliminary investigation report mentions an advisory issued as far back as 2018 by the FAA in the United States of America. This clearly said that there was a potential problem with the fuel switches and their locking, and their locking, and yet this was not issued as a mandatory warning. It is also possible that the pilots of various Boeing planes were not even aware or made aware of this particular FAA advisory of 2018. We'll be sharing details about what it said in a moment from now. There are also heartbreaking details of what the conversation was that took place between the two pilots, because it is now clear that immediately after takeoff, the fuel switches within 1 second of each other went from on to cut off. I want to introduce at this point our very special guest who's going to help us make sense, as much sense as we can make, of this preliminary report. Captain Sam Thomas is with us. He's the president of the Airline Pilots Association of India. Captain Thomas, thank you. I know you have a flight, so I'm going to make this as quick and sharp as I can. We know from the preliminary report that the commander asks the first officer, "Did you cut off the fuel switch?" And the first officer, the co-pilot, categorically says, "I did not." We also know that within 1 second of each other on engine 1 and engine 2, the fuel switches, mysteriously it seems, go from run to cut off position, thereby no fuel is going to the engines. The pilots refute that they have anything to do with this. The report actually flags an FAA advisory from 2018 pointing to a possible problem in the locking of these fuel switches on all Boeing planes. And yet the report does not at this stage, I'm quoting from the report, suggest further action against the Boeing planes. It's open-ended. It leaves room to speculate about so-called pilot error. Here are excerpts from that preliminary report on our screen. And the Western media has lapped it up. The BBC this morning, I just called them out for it, ran with an absolutely incorrect report saying that the pilots cut off the fuel to the engines. Why would the pilots cut off the fuel to the engines? Your first thoughts, Captain Thomas.
Thank you, ma'am. Firstly, like you very rightly pointed out, this was a report that was released in the middle of the night. I don't understand what the secrecy is all about. Secondly, 2 days prior to this report, the Wall Street Journal published something with regard to the fuel control switches being the center of the investigation and the inadvertent movement of them. How did they get that report, which is now in this particular report? That means there is a leak from this particular organization, and the fuel control switches are not something that pilots play around with. So this is something that would be done only if the checklist demanded you to do that. Now, there are two options here. One, has the fuel control switches gone off on their own? Now, a nondescript bulletin which comes out stating that, yeah, this could happen. Now, the operators do the maintenance based on the severity of the bulletins that are issued from the manufacturer. Now, this is a very nondescript advisory kind of thing. Hey, this could happen. So, all Boeing aircrafts have this problem. Please take a look at it at your convenience. Now, what has happened right now is still in the realms of speculation again as to did it happen on its own or did the pilots cut them off. Now, there is a conversation that is put out there which says, have you cut it off? And who's asking whom? It's not clear yet. And
Yeah.
it
I
doesn't
mean, I
happen
am
like
I am making an assumption here by the nature of command in within a cockpit that it would be the commander asking the first officer. You're saying that's not clear.
there
But
is
what
a
is
there is an
clear, but what is
yeah.
clear is that pilot one says to pilot two. Pilot one says, "Did you do this?" Because pilot one notices that the fuel switch is in cutoff mode, and the second pilot says, "I did not do it." In simple words, we know that the fuel switches mysteriously or inexplicably are in cutoff mode. One pilot discovers it, asks the second pilot why this happened. The second pilot says, "I did not do it." In other words, both pilots are refuting that this had anything to do with the pilots. Now, this is where, Captain Thomas, what becomes very important is the 2018 advisory. And if I can please have it up on the screen, I would like to read out a portion from this to you. Now, look at this, Captain Thomas. You obviously know this, but this is for our general audience because to me, it is such a scandal that Boeing might get away, that this might be a repeat of what we saw happen with the 737 MAX incidents, where the pilots were initially blamed and then Boeing was forced to acknowledge its own design and engineering issues. Now, this is an advisory that comes from the FAA in 2018. Pilots are pointing out that this did not even come from Boeing itself, right? This has come from FAA. In other words, Boeing, the manufacturer of this plane, has not even sent the advisory themselves. And it actually talks. It's what's called an airworthiness information bulletin, talking about a range of Boeing planes. And I'm going to read the operative part out to you now. The operative part is basically the FAA says as far back as 2018 that there could be a problem with the locking of this. So, in other words, you could leave it on, but it could slip back to off. I'm saying it in a very rudimentary language so that people can
Correct,
actually
correct.
understand. And then it says if the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition. And the switch would be exposed to the potential of inadvertent operation. Inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in flight engine shutdown. Why is the report at this point giving a clean chit to 787, even though the report mentions this advisory, which very clearly says that there is a problem, potentially a problem with locking the fuel switches on various Boeing aircraft?
That you've hit the nail on the head precisely. This is like an advisory. This is the at least they gave an advisory. In the case of the MCAS system, there was not even an advisory. The pilots were not even told that such a system exists in the 737 MAX. So it's not surprising that Boeing comes out with these uh, advisories just to cover their back to say that, hey, we had said this. It's up to you to figure out what to do. And in this case, not even this is the lowest form of or kind of bulletin. And this people may
And
not
this
take it
bulletin
seriously.
is not even from Boeing, it's from the FAA.
Correct, correct. Now, there is a blurring of lines in the United States between the FAA and Boeing, and God knows who is with who. And it's like you write an exam paper, and then I send it back to your house to correct it and bring it back. So those kind of issues are there with the FAA. And having said that, now it's going in a direction wherein they say that the pilot is asking another pilot, did you cut it off? This doesn't happen that way. It is engine number one, fuel cut off, switch confirm. The other
Yeah,
pilot says affirm, then he
yeah.
cuts off, then they call cut off. So it's not something that just happens. Now, very casually, what they have mentioned there is that, yeah, this could go from run to cut off without anybody doing anything. and that could lead to engine failure. That's all. It's a very simple thing. Both the engines would fail, and then you are left to do whatever little checklist in the next 15-20 seconds, and first of all to decide how this happened. That would take
Yeah.
some time. It would be a huge startle effect because this is not something that normally happens. So again, as far as the AAIB is concerned, did you see the line which says we are not blaming anybody? That is because you don't know who to blame. You don't even know what has happened. That is
Yeah.
what we are harping on, to take in subject matter experts. And one, then again, this is a preliminary report. This does not have to be final. But then we would again question the credibility of the people conducting these investigations.
Let's talk a little bit about that. You're saying you are questioning the credibility of those conducting the operation, I beg your pardon, investigations. In other words, you are questioning this report. Can
Yes.
you can you tell us why? One is that there have been planted leaks in the run up to the
Yes.
publication of this, to the release of this. It was in the middle of the night. Now it's available for everybody. One of the things that particularly bothers me, and I'm going to request my producers to pull this out on my Twitter page, you will find there is a BBC News screenshot, and the BBC News headline says pilots cut off fuel to plane. I mean, I have never seen. I want to actually uh, ask my producers to pull this out, and we'll show it to you in just a moment. Uh, Basically, the BBC is reporting that the pilots have cut off the fuel supply. Now, is one of the things that has happened in this report is because you have left it open ended. You have left room for speculation, and you have said at this point there is no action against the BBC. I beg your pardon, against the 787.
Point.
Um, you have a problem with the process of the investigation itself. Why is that?
Because we are all aware of the AAIB and its constituents. The website itself says that you have to have 20 years of experience in air accident investigation, which none of the so-called experts meet. And they are all, like I said again, rehabilitation center for ex-Air Force personnel. So
Hmm.
some of them are not even from the flying background. So they could come out with
Look
whatever
at this.
they
Look at this.
feel.
Look at this headline. Sorry to interrupt you. This
Yes.
is what I wanted you to see. Breaking Air India crash. Pilot cut off fuel to engines. No fault with plane. I mean, this smacks of a massive, typical deja vu when it comes to Boeing.
Not surprising, not surprising. That's the way they do it. The FAA will put out a leak that would be picked up by a journalist based out of Washington,
Yeah.
Seattle, I'm sorry, Seattle. And then the BBC would follow that and say that, hey, look, uh, pilot did this. Therefore, there is nothing wrong with the fact that pilot cut off the fuel to the engines. That's a part of the checklist if that is the emergency. It says very clearly cut off both and put it back to run, press and hold the rat for 1 second. Now, while you are saying that the actions might have been correct, this insinuation is very clear, which states that let's go down the line of guilty until proven innocent, and push it down that line, which most of the air crash investigations, unless it's thoroughly done, will end up with the same fate as either the Calicut or the Max crash or something like that.
So, what leaps out to you at this point? You are questioning the process of this preliminary investigation. B, you are questioning in a way how open ended it's left everything, leaving room for Western media to pick up this pilot error narrative. C, the crash report does mention the FAA advisory that flags a potential problem with locking the fuel switches, but doesn't actually list malfunction of these switches as a potential
No,
reason for the crash.
correct. They very clearly put it out there. Now it's for you to interpret that. And secondly, with so much of secrecy, the journalists are banned from entering the vicinity of AAIB or the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Nobody is given any access. But then you have the Wall Street Journal publishing the exact same thing 2 days prior to what. So your system is not leak proof. and leak proof only to the Indians. And you're keeping the Indians and the Indian pilot community out only with an intent malafide. That is my allegation. That's our association's allegation. We've begged everybody to just keep us as even observers, because far too many pilots have been sold down the river with this kind of explanation. Now, again, what is the necessity for you to, in the middle of the night, come and release a report that is not even signed? Now, I don't know. It's given to us by the media. Why not be transparent? Come out. The director of AAIB or the officer in charge comes out, hold a press conference, and says, "Hey, this is the copy of what I found, and this is 30 days, and I'm giving to you in 30 days." That should have been done yesterday, and hand over a copy to the media, rather than somebody with sources inside leaking it out from there and unsigned copy. Will they stand by this? Tomorrow they can turn around and say we didn't give it at all. So these are our.
So, is the Airlines Pilots Association, ALPA, rejecting this preliminary report?
No, we have no power to reject or accept a report. All we are saying is that this is not the lines on which investigations are done. We need a more professional unit, we need more transparency, and we need accountability. These are the three asks from our side. Let it be on lines with what's done world over. We are not asking for anything special. We're just asking, don't make hash of all these things, because a lot of, like we said earlier, a lot of so-called experts had come and said that the aircraft rotated at the end of the runway, birds got inside, the flaps were not
Yeah.
in position. Those experts should not even be traveling as, be allowed to travel as passengers anymore if they can't stand by what they have to say. This is exactly what we're saying, that don't indulge in speculations. The journalists are allowed. They are allowed to ask what they feel like, or whatever they think is on. It's our job to put exactly what is uh, the factual matter with the data, and only then speak about it. So that is one of the concerns that leads to these kind of thing. And the Western media is very good at spinning stories, and somehow the Indian media is lapping up, a section of the Indian media is lapping up those stories, just for reasons only they can explain.
As a senior pilot, I know you have a flight, so just stay as long as you can. But uh, uh, as a senior pilot, when you see a BBC headline that says "Pilot cut off fuel to the plane, nothing wrong with the plane," how does it make you feel?
The Britishers have been doing this for a long time.
Yeah,
So we do, as a part of our organization, what we do is we call up our corresponding member associate in the British ALPA,
yeah,
and we tell them, hey, look, there is this thing going on. And we call up the FAA as well and say that um, you know, these people are publishing which has no sort of basis. Now, what they have is something called the First Amendment and the right to speak whatever you want. And if you have a problem with that, you need to go and sue them. So, therefore, the authorities can do nothing about it. And under the freedom of, you know, journalistic sort of creativity, they go around doing that, and very little we can do. It's just when the mainstream media in India picks it up and blows it out of proportion, that's when the
yeah.
uh,
But
and it's done with design, not by error. It's done by
but
design and not by error. That's what we have to point
But
out.
a pilot sent me this message on this FAA 2018 advisory saying it's not even a Boeing advisory. It's a FAA advisory at a time when FAA and Boeing were hand in hand, especially during the development of the 737 MAX incidents. And
Correct.
there's a big question mark over whether Boeing was actually subjected to external auditing, or whether, whether there was even those kind of checks and balances. I can see Dr. Aditya Piranjpe join us now, but Captain Thomas, before you leave for your flight, just a couple of thoughts on this FAA advisory. I want to read it out for the benefit of everybody and also juxtapose it with what a US aviation attorney, Mary Schiavo, said about a possible software glitch in the aircraft. Now, again, I am going to, if we can have it up on our screen, I am going to actually read out what the bulletin actually said. The FAA bulletin. This is Mary Schiavo. Thank you. If we can now move to the FAA bulletin, it's very, very important because the Air India crash report actually mentions this. I would need this up now, guys. I would need the FAA 2018 bulletin up on our screens. There it is, and I'm just going to read it out. So, the Boeing company received reports from operators of Model 737 planes that the control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The fuel control switches are installed on the control stand in the flight deck and used by the pilot to supply or cut off fuel to the engines. Remember, fuel has been cut off to the engines on takeoff. This is what the Air India report says. The fuel control switch is a locking feature to prevent inadvertent operations that could result in unintended switch movement between fuel supply and fuel cutoff. In order to move the switch from one position to the other under the condition where the locking feature is engaged, it is necessary for the pilot to lift the switch up while transitioning the switch position. If the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition, and the switch would be exposed to the potential of inadvertent operations. Inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in flight engine shut down. Now, this is really critical because this is exactly what could have happened here, Captain Thomas. And yet, pilots that I've been speaking to say that because this was issued by the FAA as an advisory, pilots and crew may not have even been aware of this. There was nothing mandatory, it wasn't a mandatory warning, and so on. And intriguingly, the Air India crash report flags this as advisory, but at the same time concludes that there's no further action necessitated for the 787, though the advisory says that this applies to all Boeing aircraft or multiple Boeing aircraft. Captain Thomas, I know you have to go, so just stay as long as you can, hop off whenever you need to. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in closing, I'd like to state that they've put out this advisory to show that we've said what we have to say. It's up to you to cover up those maintenance issues. And now, without any sort of conclusive proof on this, it's going on the lines of it could have been inadvertently turned off by the pilot's hand hitting. It's going in a direction where it says that somehow get it to the pilot error and be done with this entire investigation. That is why we're saying that if you go by the existing personnel in AAIB, we feel they are not sufficiently qualified enough to get to the bottom of this issue. This has far larger consequences, and at no time should commercial interests of a company, no matter how huge, take precedence over flight safety and maintenance protocols. Thank you so much, Barkha.
Yeah, just before you go, sorry, one very quickly, just before you go, I want you to recap two or three main points that you'd like to drive home at this point. One is that the crash report you question the report itself because you feel there hasn't been enough transparency in who is conducting the operation, and you believe that the pilot community has been kept out of it. Am I
Yes,
summarizing you correctly?
that is correct. That is correct.
Okay. Secondly, you believe that although the report clearly documents the pilots refuting that they have cut off the fuel switches from run mode to cut off mode, you believe that there is some sort of attempt here to pin it on the pilots and be done with, as you called it, in quote unquote, be done with it. Is it your
Yes.
fear then that Boeing gets away while the pilots get smeared?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when there is a question asked between the pilots, did you do it? He says, I didn't do it. That means it has gone off on its own. Now that it's gone off on its own, you have only one choice. That's to put it to cut off and run, just to change the EECs and try to revive. And it says that he has done that. The airplane was in a revival mode. The engines were spooling up, thereafter went back again. So, given that,
What is this going to do to morale of the pilot community today?
oh, it's in the boots at the moment because for reasons not just with the crash. When the crash happens, there is a pall of gloom that settles on every pilots and their families. And the problem is that we live in such a punitive society that we were saying that the pilots, it's the toughest to fly an airplane in India because, like we had mentioned in the previous interaction as well, suspension is the order of the day. First thing is you suspend the pilot, irrespective of whether you do a good job or a bad job. The
Yeah.
armed forces, we must mention here, do a much better job than us. When they do a good job, they are rewarded. Here, on a daily basis, pilots navigate the airplane from northern India to southern India, western India to eastern India under extreme circumstances of weather. The monsoon is not easy to fly through. On an hourly basis, we avoid weather, and when there is even as much as a small complaint from a frequent flyer who encountered a bump, the first thing that they do is put the pilot under suspension, put an inquiry, and then there's no defense. It's just order passed. And that is something that compounds when these
Yeah, that's so
accidents.
sad to hear, Captain Thomas. Before you go, are you worried that the truth of Air India 171 crash may never come out?
Ma'am, as long as we are alive, our association is kicking, we will make sure that the truth comes out, irrespective of the cost and the effort that are required. We will not let Sumit and Clive be thrown under the bus. We will go to the bottom of this. We are not here just to defend Sumit and Clive. We are saying let the truth come out. If there is an error, pilot error is not uncommon. But then, what are the circumstances that led to the pilot error? Was he like totally, you know, uh, fed up with life that he had to cut off these fuel control switches? I mean, it's being bandied in the public that these are fuel control switches which pilots play around with regularly. No,
Yeah,
they are very, very critical switches. And if you are saying that such a critical switch has this design flaw, then who should be held responsible? Why is this so critical switch having a design flaw which necessitates the FAA to put out a circular, a bulletin, and then still be there in the this one? Isn't it surprising? I mean,
yeah.
that I think would be my closing before I
Yeah,
have.
we'll let you go, Captain Thomas. I know you have a plane to fly, and I don't want to keep you from that. We'll reconnect later in the day. But
Sure.
absolutely, I think the last words that you will not allow, the pilot community will not allow Captain Sumit Sabharwal and Captain Clive to be thrown under the bus, which is really what a lot of Western media is currently doing, making use of much of the open ended language in this Air India preliminary report that leaves the door wide open for speculation, but actually does not talk about the role of possible design flaw, as you've called it, of the fuel control switches themselves. Captain Thomas, thank you. Before I get Professor Ditya into the conversation, I want to remind everybody that this is a company whose CEO testified before the US Congress, before the US Senate, admitting to security lapses in a different context, but the principle remains the same. Boeing has a history that is going to come under scrutiny, and a lot of people reading the preliminary report are questioning why Boeing is being given an early clean chit at this point, when clearly the Air India report mentions an old advisory, but a still valid and relevant advisory on a locking mechanism problem with the fuel switches. Take a look at what the Boeing CEO admitted earlier.
And I'm committed to continue to work transparently with our regulators and with Congress. Last month, on March 10th, marked the 6th anniversary of the tragic loss of passengers and crew members on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. I know many victims' family members, as well as those from Lion Air Flight 610, are here today. And I want to extend my personal condolences for the painful loss of their loved ones on our aircraft and offer my pledge to make the necessary changes so this never happens again. Boeing made serious missteps in recent years, and it's unacceptable. In response, we've made sweeping changes to the people, processes, and overall structure of our company. While there's still work ahead, these profound changes are underpinned by deep commitment from all of us to the safety of our products and services. This commitment to aviation goes well beyond Boeing. We play a crucial role in the U.S. economy and the national security, as evidenced by the U.S. Air Force recent selection of Boeing to build the world's first sixth-generation fighter jet, the F-47.
Now, let me bring in Aditya here as an aerospace engineer who's been watching this right from the first day. And, Right after the crash, Aditya, I remember when everybody was trying to point a finger at the pilots, you had actually saved the narrative to a much more rational and measured space. Now, here we are in that moment again. The Air India preliminary report does not actually lay blame directly at anybody's door. In fact, it opens by saying that the purpose of this report is only to avoid future such incidents from repeating. The purpose is not to apportion blame. However, because the language is open ended, because there are more questions than answers, a lot of speculation has begun, and sections of the Western media, the BBC, the leak in the Wall Street Journal, air currents, it has all begun with pointing a finger at the pilot. Whereas we now know, because the report does mention this, that the cockpit voice recorder conversation, the pilot one, presumably the commander, says to the first officer, "Did you cut off the fuel to the engines? Did you basically turn off the fuel switch?" And the second pilot says, "No, I did not." In other words, there is an acknowledgement, and this happens within 1 second of each other, that fuel is cut off to both engines immediately after takeoff. However, how that happened is not explained, which is where the 2018 FAA advisory becomes really critical. The Air India crash report mentions this advisory as flagging a locking mechanism problem with the fuel switches. In layperson's term, it simply means the pilots may believe the fuel switches are on, but they may have actually slipped back to off if there is a problem with the locking mechanism. Now, the advisory, as I read out, actually talks about how an inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an in flight engine shutdown. It's quite clear that there has been an in flight engine shutdown. It's also clear that when the pilots notice that the switches are in cut-off mode, they put them back on. The report acknowledges and says that the switches transition back to on. One engine is recovered. The second engine is not able to, the deacceleration of the second engine cannot be stopped. And the plane is at a low altitude. It crashes into a building. And that's the sorry end of Air India 171, the tragic end. I want your first thoughts on this report.
Yeah, so thanks, Barkha. I think so. Let me start by pointing out a few things here. So I went through the report as well as the 2018 advisory. Now, first off, the report is open-ended, I think, because while they acknowledge that the switches went from run to cut off, they do not know why they went in there, and I think that's partly why it's open-ended at this moment. Now, I think what the Western media has done, I don't know what they've done precisely, but given that they've said in some places that the pilots are responsible, is they have taken this leap in a sense of saying that, look, these switches going from run to cut off cannot happen automatically because the switches are spring loaded, they are protected in that sense, and
Yeah.
ergo pilots must have done it. So they sort of jumped through these steps, assuming, of course, that the switches were functioning perfectly well. And I think at that point we have to be a bit cautious. We shouldn't take that leap yet because we do not know exactly why the switches malfunctioned. Having said that, the wording of the 2018 advisory, again, if I may just point out one specific line in there. I'm sorry, I'm just pulling it out on my
Yeah.
computer.
And in fact, I want it up on the screen as well. Can we have the advisory up on our screen, please? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the wording. I mean, this is where I think it gets a little strange. So I'm going to repeat probably what you read. If the locking feature is disengaged, this is the second but last line, second from last line. I'm sorry, in background. If the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition, and the switch would be exposed to the potential of inadvertent operation. Now, my understanding of inadvertent operation is an accidental push. That is how I understood it. Not in the sense of the switch tripping itself. Now, a few more things that
But it's not clear. But it's not clear.
It's not
It's
clear.
actually, if I look at this advisory, it is not clear. And what I understand as a layperson, I'm not an engineer like you, I'm not a pilot like Captain Thomas. But when I read this advisory, what it says to me is there's this, you can choose a mode for these switches, but there's a problem with the locking. Because this language about what does this word mean about with locking disengaged?
So let me explain one word here, which is operation. Okay, the word operation. Now remember, this is a bulletin that's prepared mostly for the airline operators and obviously for the airline companies to see. The word operations in the aviation world is distinct from engineering. So operations refers to how the airplanes are flown, maintained, not how they are designed or engineered. So we use the words design, engineering, and operations. That's why the word operations to me immediately suggested something that's being done in the cockpit as part of flying. So my suspicion is, so again, look, this we don't know precisely what's happening under the hood. The sense that I got from reading that line is that it might, if you accidentally move it, you may end up tripping the switches. That's the sense that I got from
Yeah, but
reading it.
here's the problem with that supposition, right, Aditya?
Yeah.
After takeoff, there is no reason for a pilot's hand to go to the fuel switch.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there is
Exactly.
zero. There is, in fact, I mean, it would be great if we could pull out just an image. I think if the producers could share an image, I had shared it on our WhatsApp group last night of what this switch actually looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no reason for a pilot's hand to go there. And
Uh,
you can hit something on engine one once, but twice.
no, you
There are
can't.
separate
That's
fuel switches for engine. You can't make, even if you say these pilots, and by the way, they're very experienced pilots, why would their hands be on the fuel switch?
no, 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 no,
Even if
no.
you say, ek bari galti se push ho gaya, second time.
No, Barkha, so please don't get me wrong. I'm not even suggesting that the pilots are at fault here. Please. That's not the point. But I think even as we try to build a case for why this happened, it's essential for us that we appreciate the technical details because that's where the devil lies. So let's
Right.
assume for the sake of argument, so this problem was noticed in 2018. By that point, the 787s had been in service for almost 6 years. I don't recall off the top of my head how many 787s had been inducted by Air India at that point, and whether, for example, A and B are the earlier 787s. I don't know that for a fact, but my guess is once this bulletin was out, Air India would have ideally actioned this item. So if you notice in that same bulletin, if we sorry, I need to pull out that document again. Yeah, you're right. So that's where it's located. If you go to the
Yeah.
second page of that same document, it lists a very specific Honeywell part number for the affected airplane. So 737s is where they were first noticed. In fact,
Yeah.
noticed by the operators. And also, what's
Yeah. Could we
interesting,
open the advisory? Let me send it to you all again in full. Yeah.
yeah. So if you just
Go
open
ahead.
the
Yeah.
advisory, you will see that on the second
Yeah.
page they list the specific part number of the affected switches. Um, Now, so all they had to do was to replace or fix that part. That is it. That's all that was needed. And I would like to assume, because I don't see any reason why Air India wouldn't do it. Air India would have replaced that part if that replacement was needed at that point.
But there is a response to that from Air India. Again, not officially. Um, no, this is the first page of the advisory, guys. Can we go
No,
to the
no,
next page?
second page, yeah, the second
Yeah,
page,
I'm trying to tell them to go to the second page. There, right?
yeah.
Now
So
here
the
here here
second,
is the here is the here is the point, right? I want to
hmm,
read out what somebody said to me, which is that this was not even issued by Boeing, this advisory.
no,
Just one second. It came from the FAA, and
yes,
then this is a senior pilot who said to me that, sorry, I'm trying to pull out, there's so much information, but basically the bottom line of all of this is that this was not sent as a warning, it was
yeah,
not sent as a mandatory check,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
sent,
as a bulletin, exactly. And I
right.
think the reason for
And
that, the
yeah,
reason for Yeah, and
yeah,
the reason for that, I suspect, is on the first page of that same document where FAA says that it does not see this as necessarily being.
that's right, that's right,
So
that's what I was trying to, that's what I
first,
was trying
second
to pull out.
paragraph, first line, right? Based on an assessment utilizing the limited data available at this time,
Yeah,
the airworthiness concern is not an unsafe condition that would warrant an
exactly,
AD. Yeah.
exactly.
So now, okay, I don't know why. Well, I don't know exactly what their thinking was in here, honestly, because fuel switch is cutting off is a serious condition. Whether it happens during climb, descent, approach, whenever, even if it happens in cruise where you have the time and the energy to actually land the airplane safely, or even go for a relight. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I think that is the so I think the reason why I pointed this out was, again, the language is very detailed in there. So we don't know why they thought it was not unsafe, but we know why they didn't opt for an AD. So if it's not an AD, it comes as a bulletin, which is how it has come out. Now, if we look at the accident, the preliminary report that's come out, um,
Yeah.
we talk about, okay, the switches being in cutoff. The pilot, and we don't know which of the two pilots has noticed this, whether it's a pilot flying or the pilot observing, and they ask, okay, did you turn it off? And the person says no. The first thing that impressed me was the real short period of time within which they responded. Because if you notice the timestamps that they mention in the document,
Yeah.
they really tried to relight the engine immediately. And one engine almost started to. So the language is very specific again. If I may again go back to now the preliminary investigation report. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I have multiple PDFs open here because I've been trying to
Yeah.
make sense of it
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Um, Really sorry about that. I'm going to read out the exact wording. Okay, so the EGT, that's the exhaust gas temperature, was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating relight. Engine 1's core deceleration stopped, reversed, and started to progress to recovery. So what it means is that the engine that was initially slowing down, that is its rotations are slowing down, has now started to accelerate. It's recovering. Recovering does not mean it's producing a lot of useful thrust. It just means it's going in that direction. Engine 2 was able to relight but could not arrest core speed deceleration and reintroduced fuel repeatedly to increase the core speed. So that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Engine relate, it's taking time for it to spool up. That's fine. That's okay. So the pilots have acted in a very short span of time, and they seem to have done the correct set of things in there. I think that seems to become apparent immediately.
Yeah.
Um, and in that sense, I think the focus is entirely on why were those switches in the off position. Now, my sense when I spoke to engineers and also pilots pointed out that those switches actually spring loaded. So you cannot actually move those switches without a very deliberate action, is what the engineers seem to think. The other thing I also asked some of these engineers
But there's a
directly was,
contradiction. There's a contradiction there, right? If
no,
there is a
not
locking, okay, so here's the gray area. You are interpreting the problem with the locking mechanism as something that only becomes inadvertent if, for lack of a better phrase, galti se haath
no.
lag gaya, an
नहीं नहीं नहीं
accidental
नहीं
push.
नहीं नहीं
Then,
नहीं Barkha, no. All I'm
then,
saying is, so I'm just telling you what a switch is supposed to do if it's the correct part, if it's not broken, and it's the correct part that they fitted after the 2018 advisory. If that part is correctly fitted and it's the right part, it should require a physical lift up. So there's a spring in there that needs to be activated. You move the switch and you release it. I mean, this whole action involves a set of protection measures which are meant to prevent even an inadvertent movement. Now, by inadvertent, I should also point out one thing here. Inadvertent does not just mean the pilot's hand. I'm also talking about something that can happen because the plane experiences a very violent jerk. Even
right.
those kind of things, right? Granted, those switches shouldn't move, but let's assume for the sake of argument that the switches are old, they have been worn and whatnot. Even then, those switches should not move from run to cutoff under normal operations, which could include turbulence and gust. That's how it should be if everything is working correctly. So when if the switches have moved and the pilots haven't moved them, then obviously it's natural for us to suspect that there's something wrong with the switch that's installed in there. Now, whether that's a maintenance issue or whether it's a manufacturing defect, the report can't claim that, right? Because there is no evidence to show which of the two it is
But
precisely.
you see, the report can't claim that because the report doesn't have an answer to the central question after takeoff. And I just want to recap this for people who may just be waking up on a Saturday morning. Not everybody are geeks like us who have been up all night reading this report. Um, for anyone who has just joined us, the Air India crash report was released in the middle of the night, Friday night, Saturday morning, at about 1 in the morning. And basically, what it does confirm is that fuel to the engines, and Aditya, please correct me if I use anything wrong in terminology, but fuel to the engines was cut off right after takeoff. The aircraft attains the maximum speed. We can show that excerpt of the report. The aircraft attains the maximum speed of 180 knots. If we can have that paragraph up on the screen, please. And right after that, look at this. right? Right after that, engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff with a time gap of 1 second. Now, of course, this report's language is a bit odd because the switches,
Um,
it implies, I know what you're going to say, but reading as a layperson, a switch can't transition on its
uh,
own.
no, 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 no. Hang on. Okay, there. Let me clarify, Barkha. Remember, at this point, the only evidence they have is data from the FDR and the CVR, what they call,
Yes,
I think, the EAFR, right? Now,
yes,
now remember, what they are seeing in that data is the state of the switch going from 1 to 0. That's the transition they are talking about. They aren't
right.
saying why transition, because at this point, no cause has been attributed. All that they're saying is in the
Exactly.
data, we observe the switch going
Exactly.
from 1 to 0. But
Exactly.
remember,
Now,
but remember, it's an electronic record. It's 1 to 0 that they see in the data, and that's all they can see. Now, Barkha, again,
exactly.
I'm not trying to point this out to support anyone's cause
No,
or
no, no.
even
I'm
to
I'm
say
not
that,
getting right
but
now
I
into
think,
why this happened.
yeah, but
I right now
I
I'm
think we
just
have to be very
Aditya, hold
precise
on, hold on.
about. All
Okay,
right,
hold on. Are we in agreement that the report says? I'm reading from the report. The report is on the
sure.
screen.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
aircraft
absolutely.
achieved. Can this screenshot be moved a little to the left so I can read it? The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots, right? And immediately thereafter, the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position one after another with a time gap of 1 second. The
Yeah,
engine 1 and 2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, "Why did he cut off?" The other pilot responded, "He did not do so." Okay, now
yes,
I have only read this verbatim. This is the report.
absolutely. Yeah,
Now, if I am to translate this into an Aam Janta accessibility language, people like me, what I understand is plane takes off, it achieves a speed of 180 knots. Immediately after takeoff, because it has a lifespan of 32 seconds, we know that. Immediately after takeoff, the fuel supply to the engines is cut off 1 second after the other. The pilot senses this. The pilot looks to the other pilot, says, "Hey, did you move the fuel switch from run to cut off?" The other pilot says, "I didn't do it." They realize something is wrong. They immediately try to retrieve from off to on. One engine, the rat also gets deployed. One engine comes back somewhat to life. It's starting to progress. The other engine doesn't. It's at low altitude. The plane crashes into a building. This is what I
yeah,
have understood, right?
absolutely. And that's exactly what has happened. That's absolutely what has
Okay.
happened.
Okay. So if we agree on that, the question is, how did the fuel switch move from run to cut off after
Correct.
takeoff? Right?
Absolutely. And I think
That's
that
the
done.
operative question.
Correct. Okay. And now let me add a few more details in there, right? So
Okay.
remember, so we started with the 2018 bulletin, right? And then where we talked about a specific part that had to be replaced. There's a part number in that advisory. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming, of course, that Air India would have actioned it if it applied to this specific airframe.
Hmm.
They haven't. So the thing is, when airframes are manufactured, they're manufactured over several years. So it's also possible that this might have applied to every single airframe in that family, or airframes manufactured during a specific time window. So the assumption is, whatever had to be done, if Air India followed the maintenance procedures, it would have actioned this. So with that, we can, if we were to assume that the switch was perfectly fine, as in it was the correct switch, it had
Hmm.
been checked. The question, of course, is why did it trip? Now, the interesting word here is trip. And one thing I was able to check, again, I'll be honest, I kind of queried some search engines. I asked at least one engineer that I know, can a switch trip in the sense of a fuse tripping in our house? And the answer
Yeah.
was no.
Yeah.
No, the switch does not trip. It's a simple switch, just as our light switches are. They're manually driven off and on. They do not trip on their
Yeah.
own. So that's the other concern now. But then, if they do not trip and the pilots haven't done it, the question, of course, is what's driven the switch from run to cutoff? And because there's no explanation, the report's open-ended, saying, what, it's transitioned, but
Yeah.
it's not saying it doesn't know why. But that's effectively what
Yeah.
it's saying by not attributing a cause either. It's saying we do not know why it has happened.
But can I read out
Look,
something to
look,
you? Can I read out something to you?
yeah, please, please.
Okay, this is what, can we have this up on our screen? I've just sent it to you, to Shirali at the back end. What does the report say about the FAA advisory? The Air India preliminary report, right? It
Yeah.
says the FAA issued a special airworthiness information bulletin, so and so number, in 2018 regarding the potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature. This was based on reports from operators of Model 737 airplanes,
Yes.
but the airworthy concern was not considered an unsafe condition that
Yes.
would warrant airworthiness directive by the FAA. So it
So they
remained an
just
advisory.
copy pasted that line pretty much for all practical purposes.
Correct. Then
Yeah.
it goes on to say the fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models. In other words, even though this advisory was in the context of the 737s, it goes. This is important. It includes a part number 4TL8373D, which is fitted in the 787, right? So it
Yes.
basically says that the I'm going to read this part again because it's important. This is from the preliminary report. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including part number 4TL8373D, which is fitted in the 787 aircraft. As per the information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as this was advisory and not mandatory, and said that there was no um, sort of safety alert on it. I mean, that last line is my summary. The scrutiny of maintenance records revealed that the throttle control module was replaced in 2019 and 2023. However, the reason for the replacement was not linked to the fuel control switch. There has been no defect reported pertaining to the fuel control switch since 2023. Further, pilots who have flown this plane, Aditya, have told me that when an advisory like this comes from the FAA on the quiet, on the down low, and is not issued as a mandatory warning, pilots may not even be made aware of this.
That's true. Yes, and that is actually probably also what happened with, I mean, with the Maxes, because there was no clear procedure for the two airplanes to deal with the Max. We know that, and that's actually, I mean, that's sort of the backdrop for a lot of the discussion that's, I think, happening right now around Boeing.
Yeah.
Look, I think so. In all of this, they've identified the correct part number. Now, we do not know I do not know at this point, because remember, the preliminary report is just a statement of the facts. It isn't saying why the module got replaced. And they've talked about, I mean, there's this little cryptic thing, right, that there has been no defect reported with the switch since 2023. Okay, so presumably the part was replaced, and they would have possibly, even if it happened in 2023, replaced the correct part after the advisory. But 2023 is 5 years after the original advisory, so presumably by then the part would have been updated. So that also gives us reason to believe that maybe the correct part was used. Now, the point that honestly bothers some of us at this point is what else has been happening under the hood in those systems. That is not known, but that will only become clear once the final report is revealed, when the final report is released, I'm sorry, and that will obviously take some time. But I think
Right.
what I should point out here again, for the benefit of listeners or even people like us, and it's good for us to also remind ourselves, the preliminary report is a statement of facts. If you notice, there is not a single conjecture in this report in terms of the wording as well, which means saying
Well,
this
the
has
wording,
happened.
I personally would disagree there. I find the wording open ended enough that the Western media. See, there are two
Oh,
problems. The leak to the Wall Street Journal and air currents on the fuel switches and linking that to headlines of possible pilot error
no, I
has
think that is
created a
not.
narrative
Yeah,
has created a narrative in the Western media where only very technical people look at this. The Air India crash probe is focusing on the pilot's action and hasn't pointed
no,
to a
that is
problem
not.
with Boeing
That,
787 Dreamliner. This was the Wall Street Journal headline one day before the report came out. I mean, I
yeah,
think that there is a problem here.
that is no. So there is a problem there with how it's being. So look, there's a problem between where the communication is happening with the media, how they are interpreting it. Quite frankly, if this is what they've been reporting, it's not for me to judge them, but it's real lack of diligence on their part. It's
Yeah,
appalling, quite honestly. But that's for them. It's not for us to enforce standards on them or even demand standards of them, right? I mean, they operate under the US laws for freedom of speech. So
yeah.
let's not even go in that direction. Let's focus on what the report says, because we should not be unfair to the report and the investigating agency. Because remember, at the end of the day, regardless of how people may feel about Boeing, I like to think, at least personally, that the AIB, the DGCA, The Indian government as a whole do want to get to the root of this. We do not want any more casualties, either in India, with Indians abroad, or anybody for that matter. So
No,
I still inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, saying, look, the report's
okay.
stating the facts correctly, and that is how it should be interpreted.
See,
The
I
fact that the
just
Western
feel,
media has used the
I,
wrong language
yeah.
is not for us to,
But Captain,
it's appalling.
I
Sure,
want to
please.
welcome Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat to the program. Good morning, sir. Coming to you in just a moment. But Aditya and I are disagreeing on one thing, that I believe that the way that the leaks took place, very calibrated, very selective, just hours before this report was to be publicly released, at least in the Western media, helped create a whisper campaign against the dead pilots, right? But when you actually read the report does not point a finger directly. The report just leaves an open question: how did the fuel switch move from run mode to cut off mode? And remember, what's important to note is that the pilots did restore it back to run mode, because when the debris was recovered, the photographs showed that the fuel switches were in run mode, and the preliminary report also says that. The important thing at the heart of the debate is that the crash report flags a 2018 advisory from the FAA on a potential problem with the locking mechanism, and even mentions a particular part for which the advisory was issued that is also deployed or used in the 787. Now, Group Captain, I want your first thoughts. Aditya feels that the report is reasonable. It is the interpretation that has been inflammatory. I would argue that the leaks before the report helped create a convenient narrative against the pilots. And there is now a growing perception that Boeing, that does have a spotty safety record, we have a deja vu trajectory when it came to the 737 MAX incidents, where initially the pilots were blamed and then Boeing had to concede its design flaw. There's a sense in at least the aviation community that we're seeing a repeat of that. Your first thoughts, Group Captain? Hang on, sir. I can't hear you, sir. Are you muted at your end? Please unmute yourself if you are.
I think.
Anji, I can hear you now, sir.
Okay, good morning. Let me first zoom out and then I'll zoom in. The purpose of an investigation is essentially to, prevent another one from happening. And within
Yeah.
that larger mission set, the purpose of a prelim investigation or prelim report is to make sure that something that needs to be fixed quickly, gets out there. If it's an issue with equipment, you either change or repair the equipment. If issue with pilot actions, you quickly, introduce training fixes. So this report, which has come out on the 30 days mark, hasn't said anything about something that needs to be fixed immediately. Now zooming in, the entire thrust of investigation is right now on the engine fuel cutoff switches. The
Yeah.
word that is used in the report is the switch transition. So that leaves room for intentional, inadvertent, or malfunction. I think that's a very intelligent use of that word. Uh, Switches like that, mechanical switches like that, don't move on their own.
So
Nonetheless,
you
the
said intentional, accidental, or malfunction,
malfunction. So it
right?
leaves room open for all three possibilities,
Right.
which gives the team the elbow room to choose the direction they wish to proceed. I think this use of word transition is something that has delayed the report, because anybody who's familiar with aircraft switches and all that, mechanical switches don't move because of glitches in software. The software can work underneath the switch to make the engine do whatever it wants. So in that sense, I found three things interesting in this report. The first is obviously the team composition. I don't know for what reason that was hidden from us. It's only through the report we now know who's the investigation in charge and who are the members. The second aspect I learned after reading the report is this use of word transition. And within 1 second of each other, that would need further deliberation from the team. And the third aspect is I expected some immediate fixes to be given out there, may be related to the advisory that we are discussing in great detail, which says, these kind of switches could malfunction. Please look at them more carefully. In the instant case, we already have the switch available to us. If the concern was that the gate that protects it from inadvertent operation is kind of erased or not functioning well, we can look at the actual switch and find out if that advisory would have worked in this case or not. These are my opening comments.
Yeah, but can I, just for the benefit of people who may have just joined us, and sorry, Ditya, this will be a little bit repetitive for some of you. I want to read out the advisory. Can we have the advisory, the FAA advisory on the screen again? I want to read out two things, Group Captain. One, what did the advisory say in 2018? And two, what has the crash report said about the advisory? I think both things are important to talk about. So here's what happens. In 2018, the FAA advisory is issued on a problem with the locking mechanism of these fuel switches. And Aditya and I have been debating what does this word inadvertent mean, but let me read out the whole paragraph to you again. The Boeing company received reports from operators of the 737 airplanes that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. The fuel control switches are installed on the control stand in the flight deck and are used by the pilot to supply or cut off fuel to the engines. The fuel control switch is a locking feature to prevent inadvertent operations that could result in unintended switch movement between the fuel supply and the fuel cutoff. In order to move the switch from one position to the other, under the condition where the locking feature is engaged, it is necessary for the pilot to lift the switch up while transitioning the switch position. If the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition, and the switch would be exposed to the potential of inadvertent operation. Inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in-flight engine shutdown, which is clearly what happened here. Till the pilots noticed it, discussed it in the cockpit. One pilot said to the other, "Did you turn it off?" He said, "I didn't do it." They move it back to on position. My question is, why does the report not consider the possibility of a malfunction? You have said it is one of the possibilities. Why does the report not consider the possibility of a fuel switch malfunction given this advisory that itself acknowledges? Now, I'll take it one step further. What does the report actually say on the advisory? If we can bring that up now. Please move to the second one. What does the report say on the advisory? I'm sending it to you again. No, not this. What does the report say? Right? The report says the FAA issued a special airworthiness bulletin in 2018. So the Air India investigation report is acknowledging this advisory, which is how we're all discussing it, by the way. This was issued based on reports from operators of 737. The airworthiness concern was not considered an unsafe condition that would have warranted an airworthiness directive. Now, this is important. This is what the FAA said. Ki, haan, we are advising you, but you know what? We're not directing you. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, including part number 40L8373D, which is also fitted in the 787. As per the information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as the bulletin was advisory, not mandatory. The scrutiny of maintenance records revealed that the throttle control module was replaced. However, the reason for the replacement was not linked to the fuel control switch. There has been no defect reported pertaining to the fuel control switch since 2023 on this particular aircraft. Now, Group Captain, I've been talking to pilots all night, all morning. They're saying most of them were probably not even aware of this advisory. They may not even be aware because there was no directive.
Okay, there are three issues in the discussion. The first is you mentioned the report does not leave the room for malfunction. I say, in fact, it does. The use of word the fuel switches transition is the sentence that leaves room for a malfunction, because intentional is very clear. A person moved it, either of the crew. Inadvertent also involves a crew action. Is that they do it without thinking what they're doing. And I tell you what all have happened in Air Force. People have raised undercarriage on taxi track while they were doing something else in the cockpit. People have pulled ejection seat handles on the ground while they think they were doing something else. I have myself dropped my external fuel tanks thinking I was slaving my compass. So inadvertent is something that a crew does, whereas in their mind or absent-mindedness, they end up doing something which they didn't intend to. So malfunction has been this. The word transition caters for malfunction. The word transition caters for an inadvertent action, and it also obviously there is enough room to say the pilot actually did it. So that is second aspect, and third is the switch. Now,
I mean,
let
why would the pilot do it unless he wants to kill himself? Why would the pilot do it? I mean, why would the pilot do it?
correct. So that is the question that we can't
Unless
answer.
the pilot has a death wish, why would the pilot do it?
That's right. That's not the question that we can answer. That is for the investigation to ascertain
No,
their
I'm
mental
just saying,
state.
sir, I'm going to assume right now that given how hard the pilots tried to recover the engines, the pilots had no intention of doing this. So we cannot talk about intentional because the pilots are scrambling in their 32 seconds to restore the engines.
Nobody is saying pilots did it. I'm explaining the use of word transition that creates three possibilities. For with no stretch of imagination, I'm saying the pilot could do it. I don't know. I don't know what happened in the cockpit. This the prelim report says the switch transition from run to cutoff. So three possibilities exist. And now coming back to or circling back to the advisory you mentioned, that advisory says there is a possibility that the obstruction that prevents inadvertent operation, which makes it a two-step operation, you pull the switch up, then move it back or forward. If the obstruction is worn out, the chances of inadvertent operation increases because your hand could be moving there and it touches the switch, it flips to off. So in this case, the panel is with us. If the
So,
obstruction has not worn out, then the advisory is more an additional information which is not directly linked to the cause of the accident.
okay, well, all I'm saying, I was not suggesting that you're saying that the pilots did it. I was just making a commonsensical point that given that the report itself acknowledges that the pilots then, once they discover that the fuel switches are in the off mode, they talk about it. One asks the other, did you do it? He says, I didn't do it. They transition the switches back to the on mode. The rat is also deployed. Now, my question is, I asked Aditya this, and I'm going to ask you this, and then come back to Professor Aditya. A mistake, if you are implying accidental as an option, can happen on one fuel switch once. How does it happen on the second fuel switch again? It just seems one, a pilot's hand would not be on the fuel switch after takeoff because there's no need. The pilot is going to assume that the fuel switch is locked in on mode. The pilot's not going to go to that area of the deck. However, even if once this mistake is made, both engines have two separate fuel switches. How can this mistake be made a second time, group captain? It seems very counterintuitive. That's all.
No, I don't know. Why that happened. That's for the report to find out.
Yeah,
That switch is used only twice. One to start the engine, and when you finish your flight, come on the bay to shut down the
yeah,
engine. In
yeah.
emergencies during in-flight shutdown for damage, securing the engine or relighting, then it is used. Otherwise, you don't go to that panel. You just start the engine in the beginning and come back to it to shut it down on the bay. There is no reason
Exactly.
for any of the pilots to go visit that area or the hand to be in that area.
Exactly. 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 That's why I feel that I am okay. Aditya, here's my question. As group captain explained, the fuel switches are used once,
Yeah.
right? Before the flight takes off and once after it lands. Right? Am I correct, group captain?
Yes.
Okay. So intuitively, there's no reason for the pilot's hand to be there. If by accident the hand goes there, it can go, an accident can happen once. The same thing can happen twice. We all seem to agree this was not cannot be intentional because the pilots are scrambling to save the plane in those 32 seconds. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, so to add to it, Barkha, I think I want to sort of re-emphasize this point about the preliminary report. Remember, it's only providing us with what has happened, not why it has happened, or even the procedure that led to it, right? It's literally what, not why and how. And I really think, uh, uh, listeners or viewers have to appreciate the exact, one of these three purposes. I don't think anyone specifically saying the pilots did it. Also, in terms of could the mistake have happened twice? Look, these are all low probability events, but remember those two switches are actually very close to each other. So all that the investigators are leaving open here is the possibility that something happened. Remember, these two switches are within the scope of a human palm. So if I were to accidentally move the palm down, and if the locking mechanisms were broken in there, the two could have fallen off from run to cut off. I'm not saying that is what has happened. I'm saying that this is what the investigators want to find out and even rule out. But to rule it out, Barkha, they need to check that conjecture, right? Because I can't rule out what I believe has absolutely not happened. So to rule
So
something
how
out,
has this played out in Wall Street Journal, the BBC
oh
today,
no, that no, Barkha,
as pilot cut off fuel? How has it
no,
played out?
that
The
is
report
not, no,
doesn't
that
say
is
that. The
unfortunate.
report does not say that.
No, it does not. And you're absolutely right. The report isn't saying any of that. The report's merely pointing out, and also, as I mentioned earlier, it's the report relies on the flight data recorders. That's why the word transition is used, because what they see in the FDR is not
Hmm.
a physical video of the switch. They only see the signal going from 1 to 0, or some such transition in the signal strength. That is it. Now, the fact that no Wall Street Journal or BBC have chosen to report it is unfortunate, but we shouldn't be swayed by it. Look, we have the report now that's come from the government. It is released in the interests of the Indian public and the global public at large. Let's go with what it's saying. It's telling us the facts, and quite honestly, with all due credit to the report, they've used the right terminology. Let's give them credit for that. And then once the process of ruling out starts, I'm hopeful that they will obviously rule things
Okay.
out soon.
So, Group Captain, we had the president of ALPA here before you joined, Captain Sam Thomas, and he doesn't share Aditya's optimism. He
Oh,
feels the Indian pilot community has been kept out of the probe, that there was opacity over who was conducting the investigation, who was the lead investigators. He feels the language is open ended enough that he believes that in the end it will all be pinned on the pilots, and the behemoth that is Boeing will not have to answer for so many tough questions that the incident, not just this incident, on the 7th of July, there was a United Dreamliner, same aircraft that crashed, 787, that took off from Newark and headed back to Newark because of a mid-air mechanical scare. One in the latest in a series of problems with this particular model. Then there has been the aviation attorney based out of America, Mary Schiavo, who has pointed to a software glitch she believes, we can put up that headline as well, a software glitch in the plane itself. And remember, this is a highly electric plane. So, Group Captain, my sense to you is the pilot community seems to believe that Captain Sumit and Captain Clive will be thrown under the bus. It's the easiest thing to do given that 1,200 Dreamliners are deployed worldwide. The status quo cannot be shattered. The stakes are too high for Boeing, and this is going to be bailing out Boeing and throwing the pilots under the bus. This is what pilots are saying off record. You talk to anybody this morning. Can we come out of this image of the switch and actually show also the third CCTV angle of the rat being deployed? Group Captain, it's over to you.
Okay, I agree with partly agree with the sentiment of Alba President. On the first part, I agree. There is unnecessary mystery over this investigation. We didn't know the team members investigating this incident. Far too much secrecy, far too much mystery, not called for. On the second part, that there is a dedicated push to throw the pilots under the bus, I disagree. The wording of the report, I would rather say, see, there are two inputs, as the previous speaker mentioned. Through the FDR, we know an electrical connection was made from run to off and then back to run. That is an electronic evidence. Then we have CVR, where one crew speaks to another and says, did you cut it off? The other crew denies it. So to accommodate these two evidences, the use of word transition is very intelligent, I would say. It includes possibilities, all kind of possibilities. It includes the evidence, electronic evidence that the switch went off. It includes the possibility of inadvertent operation. So far, whatever we've seen in this report, I don't see any desire or vector to throwing the pilots under the bus.
What do you make of the leaks that were given to Air Currents and Wall Street Journal just before this report came out? which set the narrative of pilot error
They,
wrongly, in
now
my
follow the
opinion.
money. Barkha, you are, you are into journalism. I think I joined Air Force in 1996, and around that time NDTV started coming on our screens. You've been in journalism as long as I have started been flying aeroplanes. Follow the money. The amount of money at stake is humongous. If
Exactly. Which
if
is
it
why I
comes
feel the
out,
truth will never come out, sir. Sorry, I feel the truth may never come out.
so if it comes out that switches could flip off on their own, what will happen to Boeing share? Again, the amount of money at stake is huge. I get it that there will be attempts made by very powerful quarters to make sure the aeroplane manufacturer is somehow, escapes the what do I say, the reason or responsibility. But so far, I haven't seen any vector that suggests no, they would want to get away with blaming just the pilots. I don't agree with it.
Yeah. Aditya, you want to come in there? Look, when group captain says to me, follow the money, I think 30 years of being a journalist have just made me cynical. My instinct to follow the money makes me feel exactly what he just said. That imagine if tomorrow, what this actually reveals is that yes, the fuel switches don't lock, possibly don't lock properly. We didn't know that. We now know that. By the way, this is exactly what happened with the 737 MAX. Initially, the pilots were blamed, then Boeing had to acknowledge a design issue, an engineering issue, and fix it, right? This has happened before. This could be happening again. And it just seems all too convenient to suggest, oh, maybe it was an accidental push by the pilots. These pilots are experienced pilots.
Yeah.
There's no reason for their hands to be in that area of the deck at all. I
Um,
just feels like this is a bailout, a stage being set globally for a bailout of Boeing.
well, like I said, I don't know enough about that, so hope not. But again, I'm just sticking to the report. The report itself, I agree with the group captain, is technically sound. Look, the other thing about the switches is something very interesting. As far as I know, and the group captain can confirm, or even some of the other pilots who've been on your panels can confirm, the fuel cutoff switches on the sides are unique in the following sense. They are pure, like I said earlier, they're pure electric switches. They are not like the circuit breakers or like the fuse box switches, which have a bimetallic strip and can be tripped electrically. They're not that sorts. And
I was going to ask that if there's an
and
electric failure,
as far as I
can I
know, they're
clarify that if there's an electric failure, can the switches trip?
so as far as I know, I mean, as far as what I have got from people who've worked on the 787, no. But that doesn't mean, look, but again, remember, if there's been some modification since then that we haven't found out about, I really don't know the answer to that. But
No, the
fundamentally,
switches
these are
won't
not
move.
that.
The
And as far as I
switches
know,
won't move.
the switches won't move. So
Sorry, sorry, group captain. Sorry, group captain.
Sorry
the
for
switches,
interjection. The switches won't move.
no,
They
they
have to
won't
be
move.
physically moved.
Right. So the group captain, the point was, is it like one of your fuse switches, which it is not. It's a physical switch, and even the software can't trip it. So it's not something that can be tripped electrically. It cannot
Which
be
is
moved by
why,
software.
Aditya, we are back to the advisory that if there is a problem with the locking mechanism, which can lead to an inadvertent slipping from
Yeah.
cutoff to on or on to cutoff,
Yeah.
then that answers a lot of questions, doesn't it?
It does. It could. But the problem is there is no evidence to suggest that, Barkha. That's the problem. And that's what the
What does the
committee needs.
advisory mean then? The
No,
advisory that flags the locking
yeah, yeah.
mechanism problem, what does it mean?
Yeah. So here's the thing, Barkha. Here's okay. Let me tell you. So here's. I don't want to. I mean, necessarily conjecture anything here, but look, that advisory was released in 2018, and I do want to give Air India the benefit here by believing that they acted on it and replaced the switches if there was a fault. Right? Look,
No,
this
but
advisory
look at
has been out for 7 years.
the Air India crash report says not a single complaint was reported in relation to the fuel switches,
Yeah, yeah. No, but it
and
does
the
say.
pilots that I've spoken to who fly this plane say they weren't even aware of this advisory.
No, the pilots may not have been aware, but the engineers would have been. You remember we talked about, so pilots, I mean, look, it's a different story of whether the pilots should or should not have been aware. I'm not commenting on that. But this is a fix that is
The
managed
advisory
by
has
the
not
Air
even
India
come from Boeing.
engineers to replace the
Sorry to
switch.
be cynical, Aditya. Again, I'm sorry. I don't mean to speak over you, but the advisory has not even
No,
come from Boeing. Boeing is the manufacturer of the
no,
plane. Why is
no.
the advisory not from Boeing? Go
I,
ahead, Aditya. Sorry.
I don't know. Like, I mean, so typically, if my understanding is correct, even so, these advisories can come from the FAA. So if you think of the airworthiness directives that are issued globally, they're issued by the national agencies. So the FAA typically issues them, or EASA issues them, and the other agencies typically mirror them, because a lot of the work has happened in their respective systems. Considering Boeing is based in the States, Airbus is based in Europe, so it's the agencies that issue them. And remember, some of these advisories are regulatory in nature, right? So the regulatory advisories have to come from the regulatory agencies, and I suspect that's what's going on. So that's why the FAA has released it, and there's nothing out of ordinary with it. All of the airworthiness directives or emergency directives do come from the FAA, EASA, or from the national agencies. So again, look, I must point out here, Barkha, I'm not trying to give anybody a clean sheet. I'm not even trying to suggest that someone's at fault. All I'm trying to suggest is we have a report, a document, we have a series of events, and we should patiently pursue it to its logical conclusion. No one's suggesting that the pilots were at fault here. I don't think the report says that. The fact that some quarters of the media have jumped to that conclusion is again very unfortunate. But it's our
Yeah.
job, I think, to remind our people that please don't get swayed by it. When the report's presented to you, read it. I mean, our people are educated. They should be able to read the report. If not, ask experts. Go and ask them, what does this specific term mean? There are enough and more pilots around, enough and more experts like the group captain around who can tell people that, look, this is not what the report's implying. So I think we in here should do that job by reminding people that the report has a specific technical meaning. Please ask us if you're not sure, and we'll help you out. If we don't understand it, we'll ask people who we think are experts as well, and we'll go in that direction.
Well, I just want to end with, I don't know where that banner has actually gone, but I just want to end with reading what the advisory actually says. If we can have it up on our screen. And Group Captain, I'll give both of you last comments then. It actually says that if there is an inadvertent operation of the switch, it could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in-flight engine shutdown. And that is what has happened here. It also says that the fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is on various Boeing airplane models. And if we go to, this is the wrong thing on the screen. Could you please remove it and go to the second page of this? I would like to show the second page of this, please. The second page of the advisory, and zoom in. Now, if you zoom into this, you see all of the different planes that might be impacted, and it also lists the 787. And this is why I believe that this advisory is at the heart of the story. Last comments to you, Group Captain. We also have a third CCTV angle that shows the rat was deployed. We know the pilots try and move the switches back to the on mode. The fact that there's the image of that. Last thoughts, sir. Where do we go from here?
Okay, the advisory mentions that there is a locking mechanism that prevents inadvertent operation. In the aircraft that crashed, say if that locking mechanism was functional, it had not gone down. So that would kind of make that advisory irrelevant in this instant case. The second part is...
why would it make it irrelevant? Why would it make it irrelevant?
No, because it's an obstruction that prevents inadvertent operation. If that obstruction is present, then there will not be an inadvertent operation. Then it'll be a two-step operation. Pull this switch, then pull it back. Then it is no more inadvertent. The second aspect out, are the pilots, responsible for this accident? We will probably never know, because they are not around to, explain the course of action that they chose. Through electronic forensic, going through the data or CVR, or looking at various permutations and combinations, maybe reflying it in simulator, we would make an intelligent guess. That's about it. The pilots are not around to tell us what actually happened and why, because there is that quote in the CVR. Did you do it? Did you shut down the engine? And the other guy says, no, I did not. We'll have to have an explanation for that as well. So let's see. I mean, in my opinion, this report is very intelligently worded so far.
Last thoughts, Aditya?
Yeah, so I think I agree with the group captain. I again, finally, please, to the listeners and the viewers, please allow the investigation to unfold. The report appears to be technically sound. It's using the right verbiage. It's not assigning blame. And if you ever listen to anything that seems to blame somebody, please go back and check with the report. Because the report isn't saying that, chances are someone's interpreting something that they ought not to interpret in that direction. At the end of the day, I think, again, as I sort of have been saying all over, regardless of what people may feel about Boeing or about Air India, about whoever, I'm an optimist here in that I genuinely think, regardless of the commercial interests, largely we are all on the same team. And we ultimately do want to make aviation safer for everyone. So if something of this sort happens, no company in its right frame of mind, no regulatory agency in its right frame of mind, and no engineer would ever risk such a catastrophic loss of life, and not to mention, the reputation
I,
of
I,
the agency, the airline, or whoever. So no, I
yeah,
think they will want to get to the root of it. Please give them time, because they have to logically rule out everything. And
no,
when we logically rule out something, we first start by assuming that maybe that's true, and then we rule it out saying, you know what, that can't happen.
yeah.
So please give them that
I,
space and come to
Yeah,
conclusions.
again, I don't want to be alarmist. I'm a, I spent half the year on an aeroplane because I fly so much. I landed from London late last night on an Air India aircraft, but I do at this point not share the optimism, Aditya, that I'm hearing from you that we will know exactly what happened here. And the reason for that is that I believe that the selective leaks have already set some sort of narrative. I also believe that the stakes are very high for aviation. There are 1,200 of these aircraft deployed. And I also believe that Boeing has a spotty, almost notorious track record. A Netflix documentary captures some of it. There are whistleblower accounts. There is the testimony of the Boeing CEO before the US Senate and the US Congress. We have seen with the 737 how there was an attempt to blame the pilots, and it took a second incident, and then an American airline, Alaskan airline, I think, for the door to fly out before Boeing began to take these things seriously. I hope you're right and I'm wrong. But all I will say at this point is that there are many questions. The report simply captures the heart of the puzzle. The puzzle is this: how did the fuel switch of Air India 171 go from on mode or run mode to cut off mode, with the pilots discovering that with the alarm right after takeoff, saying to their colleague in the flight deck, in the cockpit, "Did you do it?" The other guy says, "I did not do it." They do their damnedest in the whatever 20 odd seconds they have after that to restore the engines. One engine almost comes back. If they were flying at higher altitude, this may have been a very different story. The plane then crashes into a building. It's chilling actually to read some of the last conversations and how hard they tried, evidently, from everything we know, to save the plane. We'll leave it there. Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat and Professor Aditya Paranjpai, I'm sure we'll have another chance to talk to you later in the day as perhaps more information. I would really want the lead investigator at this point to come out, do a press briefing, answer some of these questions. That would be good. Thank you so much in the meantime for watching. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.